Thank you, Moses. That was great. I'd just like us to, we're going to think about that passage now. It's a passage that most of us will be very familiar with, and I'd just like us to think about it. As we do that, have you ever noticed how sports teams like to be compared to powerful animals? I mean, just think about it. Aston Villa and Millwall, the football teams, they like to be called the Lions, or they are referred to as the Lions. Wolverhampton Wanderers like to be known as Wolves. It applies to in rugby. I mean, you get Leeds Rhinos. They're all sort of animals of great power, strength, or cunning. And sports teams like to be likened to them and to carry that sort of name because it presents an image. Have you ever wondered, therefore, why it is that the Bible so often refers to God's followers as sheep? Think about it for a moment. Psalm 23 that we've just read together. The Lord is my shepherd. Psalm 103 verse 3. We are God's people, the sheep of his pasture. Psalm 77 verse 2. God, you lead your people like a flock. Psalm 79 verse 13. We, your people, and the sheep of your pasture will give you thanks forever. Why sheep? I mean, if we were going to form a football team here in Britwell, we wouldn't call it the Britwell Sheep, would we? And we all know why. Sheep are dopey animals. I mean, think about sheep and all that we know about them. Sheep are not organised. Sheep just wander off wherever they want. You can't train sheep. You can train dogs to round up the sheep, but you can't train sheep. Sheep are utterly defenseless. I mean, they've not got substantial teeth to scare away or to counterattack any aggressor. They've not got claws. There's nothing they can do to defend themselves. And probably worst of all, sheep won't learn. Sheep cannot learn. It's even been known that when sheep have been startled, for one sheep to run away, all the rest follow. The lead sheep runs straight over the edge of the cliff, and all the rest have followed on. Just imagine for a moment being the following sheep. The one in front of you, you've seen running along, descend over the cliff. You look over, you see it splattered on the rocks below, so you carry on anyway. Now, the sheep need constant looking after. And that's why we have shepherds. Shepherds to look after the sheep, because the sheep need constant looking after. Now, don't get me wrong, God does not use the analogy of sheep in the Bible so often for his followers to make us feel bad about ourselves, to make us feel incapable, or to put us down. No, but God is making a very clear point about humanity. And that is that by our very nature, we need somebody to follow. We need somebody to lead us and to guide us. And that's why in the 23rd Psalm, we get the psalmist there saying, lead us on the paths that are right. You lead us on the paths that are right, because we need somebody to lead us the right way. The psalm talks about your rod and your staff, they protect us, or they comfort us. Because we need that protection, we need that comfort. There is something about us that we need a guide. We need somebody to lead us. And that's something that we see in general life. I mean, many people go to financial advisors because we don't understand the complexities of the world about us. And if we go rushing off doing things on our own, we'll suffer loss. And therefore, we need a guide. We seek an advisor. Many people have health advisors because we need somebody who knows to help us to understand what's best for us to eat and what's best for us to do in terms of activities. Those of us in ministry, we often have spiritual directors to stop us from going off the rails. By our very nature, we need somebody to guide us. The problem is, how do we find a good person to lead us? I mean, nobody wants to choose a financial advisor who takes the money and runs off. We don't want to be let down. Yet in every aspect of our life, be it our personal lives, be it our business lives, be it in this political sphere, we need people to lead and people to guide. What we actually need in those people, though, what we need in the one we choose, is somebody who's not self-seeking, not self-serving, but is actual sacrificial, is actual giving, is there for us. And what we have in this chapter is Jesus giving the reasons why he is the good shepherd. He is the one to follow. And the first point that he makes is, he's not a stranger. He's not a hired hand. He's not somebody who's just brought in there for the short term. He makes the point that he knows us. Jesus knows us and he cares for us, in contrast to the hired person who's there to do a job. They work certain hours, off they go home, they've taken their money, they really couldn't care. Now, they wouldn't know the sheep, but Jesus does. He knows us. And that's a really important point for us as Christian believers always to remember. God knows us. If we wanted to know what, to the extent of that, we couldn't go anywhere better than Psalm 139. I've sort of edited bits out and shortened it slightly because of time, but it's a fabulous psalm. 139, it says this, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I arise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before the word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." Jesus is the good shepherd because he knows us. He knows us. He knows what we need. He knows what we are like. He knows where we are at the moment and how we're thinking and what we're doing. Jesus is the good shepherd because he knows us. The second thing we see in this passage is that we can know him. We can know him. You know, when a person makes a decision to follow Christ, that's what makes all the difference, that we can know him. We enter a relationship with him. We start to understand, to get used to his ways as we learn more about him. We start to recognize, therefore, what really is him speaking and what is other voices that might be affecting us. It's a real ongoing relationship that builds, that increasingly we get to know him. If we ever adopt a faith or settle for a faith that is any less than that, then it just becomes an intellectual thing that doesn't guide us, no more than head knowledge. But when we come to Christ, we enter this living relationship with him that grows over time. So we get to know him better and better and can follow his leading. And Jesus mentions in the passage that the true shepherd, the sheep, hear and respond to his call. Apparently, in ancient times in Israel, shepherds would have had a unique, distinctive call that the sheep would have recognized. They might be dumb animals, but they can manage just enough to recognize the different calls. So when their shepherd called, that shepherd's sheep would respond. In fact, I'm told that the way that they knew whose sheep belonged to in those days was the sheep would respond to the shepherd's call. So whose sheep are they? If the shepherd called and they responded, they belonged to that shepherd. It's not that they weren't branded, or they weren't like when I grew up in the Staffordshire Moorlands, all the sheep were heavily marked. They belonged on the sheep on the moors belonged to this farmer. No, the test was if the shepherd called, the sheep responded. A distinctive call. And it's by knowing the shepherd that we really learn that we can trust him. And then in this passage, Jesus goes on to illustrate or to explain how it's proven beyond doubt that he is there for the sheep, because he talks about the shepherd sacrificing his life. Can't get more self-giving than that. The shepherd sacrificing his life. Until Jesus came at the temple in Jerusalem, they would be constantly sacrificing sheep for the people, including the shepherds and everybody else in Israel. Sheep would be sacrificed as an offering for the sins of the people, including the shepherds. In Jesus, that role was reversed. The shepherd gave his life for the sheep. In this passage, Jesus makes the clear point that only the true shepherd would do that. He illustrates it by pointing out that in those days, being a shepherd was not a safe occupation. You know, we tend to have a bit of an idealistic view of what being a shepherd was like in biblical times. People just sitting quietly on a hillside as all the sheep grazed around. Well, some of the time, maybe it was a bit like that. But certainly at night and at other times, predators would come and attack the sheep. And the shepherd therefore had a choice. There was a dangerous animal attacking. Run or stay and defend the sheep. The hired hand would run. Only the true shepherd would stay and defend the sheep, and that was dangerous. They were taking a risk. They were taking on a wild animal. You've only got to look at the early accounts of David's life in the Old Testament to see that illustrated, how dangerous it could be. Jesus makes the point, only the true shepherd would take that risk. And of course, that's what Jesus did. We started our reading, Moses began our reading from verse 11 today of John chapter 10. Had we just read the verse before, John 10 verse 10, there Jesus says that he'd come that they might have life in all its fullness. It's a verse in the Bible that I love. It's one we should all remember. Jesus came that we might have life in all its fullness. Jesus always wants the very best for us. The one thing that stops us enjoying his best is what the Bible calls sin, the wrong that we do. When we turn away from following the Good Shepherd, when we wander off and go our own way and do our own thing, when we take ourselves into a mess, what we see Jesus referring to in this passage is that the Good Shepherd has sacrificed himself for the sheep. He's become that offering that enables the sheep to come back to the shepherd, that corrects all of the wrong that we do so that we can enjoy that best life that he wants, always wanted for us. John's Gospel, chapter 1, we've got John the Baptist. And when he sees Jesus approaching, he says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. That's what Jesus does. He becomes that sacrifice that takes away the sin. We should never forget that Jesus really is the good shepherd who always wants the best for us and gave himself for that very purpose it illustrates nothing more than the extent to which he wants that for us. And should we ever think, well, is it really for me? Jesus says in this passage a comment that actually always causes lots of, what does it mean? He says, other sheep I have who are not of this fold, or the rushes are not of this sheep pen. And of course, he's, well, who are these other sheep who are not in the sheep pen, and what sheep pen is he talking about? When we look at, many people get confused over that. I remember when I was a teenager in our church youth group back in those days, there was a girl there who read this passage, said, I wonder if it means perhaps there's life on other planets. And Jesus meant here on earth and up there. Well, I'm pretty sure that's not what he meant. Actually, when we look at the New Testament, it often appears that lots of Jesus' ministry is focused on people of Israel, on the Jewish people. So they were the sheep in the fold, in the pen. But he says, no, I've got others. He was referring to the non-Jewish, what the Bible calls what we call the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people. Now, people are all either one or the other. So it's everybody. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is here for everybody. And he calls to guide us. Maybe the key point for us to take this morning is, how are we responding to the call of the Good Shepherd who always wants the best for us? He knows us, wherever we are, whatever circumstances we're in, he knows us. We can know him. He wants us to enjoy that relationship, that walk with him. He's given his all for us. The big question is, how are we responding? In biblical times, when the shepherds called, the sheep that belonged to that shepherd would respond. That's how ownership was proved. Maybe one for us to dwell on is, do our neighbours look at our lives and think they belong to Christ? They're following the Good Shepherd. We can see that because they answer his call.